So today I'm going to talk about a topic that one of our viewers asked on YouTube, and that was regarding warming up for a competition. So a lot of people find that they'll do some sort of warm up before they compete, but then when they go to shoot, they feel quite stiff still, and then when they start scoring, maybe the first dozen or maybe the first few ends are not very good and they're kind of slow to start. So the question here was, how do I warm up in a way that makes this part of the competition a lot better and have a much faster start, basically? So there are two main parts to this, and that's the mental warm-up and the physical warm-up. So and that obviously depends on what you feel is limiting you in that start period. For some people it might be that they haven't warmed up mentally enough, and that's causing the lower score for the first dozen or so. For some people it might be the physical side. So in this case, the question was relating to the physical part of the warm-up, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. To begin with, there is not one warm-up that's perfect for everyone. There are key parts of the warm-up that you need to include, but there is not just one copycat warm-up that will get the maximum benefit for you. So it's important to be individual here and work out what works for you. The best way to do this is to obviously follow a certain framework so that you have key parts in your warm-up, and then find the exact kind of exercises and parts that are good for you and help you get ready to compete in the best way. So the framework that I would suggest using for this is quite a common framework, which is called the RAMP framework. And this stands for Raise, Activate and Mobilize, and Potentiate. So the first stage is Raise, and this is essentially just raising the core body temperature. And actually in archery, this is a stage that's often overlooked, because maybe you'll set up your bow, get everything ready, get ready to compete, and then you'll just go straight into a more general warm-up of the shoulders and maybe swinging the arms around and that kind of thing. But you've missed out the raise stage here. You haven't really raised the body temperature, and you haven't got the whole body ready to compete and perform. So this stage is pretty simple, something like jogging. If you haven't got the space to go jogging, if it's an indoor competition, maybe you can do something like star jumps, some squats, something to get the core body temperature up, get you a little bit out of breath, and basically raise the heart rate and raise your breathing rate and get you out of breath. Probably don't need to, you don't want a whole CV session, you don't want to be sweating loads, but you definitely want to raise your body temperature and make sure you're ready to compete. So that's the first stage, really. So this stage you can think of like your boot up sequence. So it's kind of like when you turn on your computer and the computer gets ready and gets all the systems ready to go. This is what the raise part of the RAMP protocol is. It's basically getting all your body ready. There isn't anything too specific yet, but it's making sure that you're ready to go on to the next stage. And if you miss out this stage, you'll feel probably generally very sluggish if you're kind of generally fatigued and maybe it's an early morning. And then you'll find it hard to kind of increase the mobility and then kind of increase the flexibility and movement when you're then shooting the shot. So generally you'll probably feel quite stiff. Maybe you can't expand through the clicker very easily. Maybe your release isn't as dynamic as you want, and just generally it doesn't feel as good in terms of your whole shot. So this stage is really important. So the activate and mobilize stage is all about getting the specific muscles in your body ready to start doing the certain pattern or the certain movement you need in your sport. So for example, in archery, this would include specific activation and patterning for the shoulders specifically. So maybe internal rotations, external rotations are great examples of this, and I'll just put those above here and here. And these are some simple exercises that you can do with just a light band and not really any equipment. You can even hold the band in one hand and then hold the band in the other hand to do the external and the internal rotation. And just these help warm up the shoulder a bit more and help the correct patterning, rather than just swinging your arms around, which maybe you'll see a lot of people swing their arms around, do general thoracic mobility, stuff like that, which is great, but then you also need to move on to the more shoulder specific stuff and activate and warm up the major muscle groups around the shoulder. So as I said, internal rotation, external rotation are great for this, but then crucially, this part of the warm up is where you want to start doing the individual patterning and individual movement learning for your specific needs. So for example, if you are working in your training to stop using your upper traps to expand through the clicker and stop using them to draw the bow, this part of the warm-up is really important because it enables you to learn the correct movement. So when you go and draw your bow, you're more likely to then learn the new skill more quickly, and you're less likely to revert back to what you were doing before. So an example of this is if you were trying to reduce the tension in the upper traps, like I said, this part of the warm-up would be really great to do something like wall angels or wall pushes, which focus on the correct use of the lower muscles of the back and the correct scapular movement and less tension in the upper traps and the neck. And I'll just put the wall angels and the wall pushes up there as well, so you can see those too. So these are some examples of what you can do in this activate and mobilize stage specific to your learning, so that you can then be more likely to do the correct thing in training. And then when you go to a competition, then you can apply that in competition, and there's a higher chance of you doing the correct movement. So that's really beneficial, and it can really help learning a new skill too. Now, obviously, this stage of the warm-up is very specific to the sport. If you were a runner, you would obviously do more leg and glute-based activation. If you're an archer, obviously the main focus here is around the shoulders, but it's important not to forget that the whole body works as a unit, and also the key connection between the shoulders and the glutes. So here, for example, for me, I also like to include some glute activation, and this is something maybe you can look at and see if it benefits your shot too, and your general warm-up as well. Now, many people find that they've done the basic warm-up in terms of raising the body temperature, activating and mobilizing, and then they go to shoot and they expect to be nice and fluid and everything should, be warmed up and easy, but everything's really stiff and really hard. And there are two possible causes for this. The first cause is maybe that you've forgotten to press that like button. So we'll get rid of that one now, and then we can ignore that cause. So I'll just wait for you to, yeah, okay. And then the second cause is maybe that you have forgotten to do the potentiate phase of the warm-up, and that's really, really key. So the potentiation phase is all about doing the specific movement, which is drawing the bow basically, and then increasing the progression of this. So for example, I would recommend start with a band and do some draw-ups with the band, and make sure you then start warming up the specific movement that you're going to do. So you just get a band and do some simple draw-ups with the band, just like this, and then you can do maybe some holds too, again with the band, and then you can increase the progression of this. Now, what you can also do is put maybe a shot trainer around the band, and then use the shot trainer to draw the band too. That's another great way to warm up. And you want to do this a decent time before you start shooting. And the reason for this is you want to increase the intensity fairly high, and then you want to allow yourself a little bit of time to recover so you're not fatigued at all. So you can start with the band, then you can progress to, maybe with the shot trainer around the band, then maybe a heavier band, then to your bow. You can do some draw-ups with your bow, and maybe then you can move on to the bow with the shot trainer. Then you can move on to the bow maybe with a band around the bow for an extra bit of poundage. And this generally is basically just increasing the poundage you're doing here and making sure you're doing the correct movement, warming up the muscles, and making sure that everything is moving, even with a higher poundage than you're actually going to shoot. Then when you come to shoot, A, it'll feel easier, but B, you've activated all the muscles and you've done the correct movement, so that now you're ready to shoot and you can just go and perform to your best right from the get-go. Now, before we finish up here, I want to explain what the best way to practice this warm-up is and how you can test it to make sure that when you go to a competition, it's gonna perform how you expect it. There are two great things you can do here. One is to practice scored rounds without any warm-up. So what I mean by this is you go to your normal training session and you have a simulation round where you're going to score a 720 or a FITA or whatever it is, and you do your warm-up and then you go straight into scoring. No warm-up ends, no sighting arrows, no nothing. You just score the first arrow and carry on from there. And what this does is it really shows if your warm-up is working or not. If your warm-up doesn't work, your first dozen will be pretty bad, because you're not getting the correct movement, you're not getting the correct activation of the muscles, and the score and the group won't be good. So if you've nailed your warm-up, then you should just have your first dozen will be good, and it should just maintain through the whole session. And that's when you know that your warm-up is working, because you can go and just perform right from the get-go to the level that you need to. So that's a really great way of doing this. And then the second way I really like doing is exactly the same basically, but I would also like to wait until a really heavy training day and then test it after that. So maybe you have a heavy training day, a few heavy training days, you wake up one morning and you're quite stiff and tense because you're under a lot of load. Then you can do the same thing, a simulation round, a scored round with no sighting arrows, no practice arrows, and really test your warm-up here, because this is the most fatigued that you will be, because you're in a heavy training period, you're fatigued, you're a bit stiff. If your warm-up works well here, then it will work great in a competition when you've tapered down a little bit, you're a bit more rested, and there's a lot less stress on the body from a heavy training period. So those are two great ways that I like to test if the warm-up is good. And this is how you can just experiment in training with particular exercises, maybe a particular potentiation kind of warm-up to ramp up the progression, and then just see if it works, so you can go to the competition and you can just be confident basically that it's going to work well. So that wraps up this video on the physical side of the warm-up. I'll also be posting a mental side of the warm-up in the future, so be sure to look out for that. And as always, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You can also get involved on social media on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll put the links to those below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.